The sky is bleeding gold. The last edge of the sun trembles above the western desert. And on the sacred river of heaven, Ra is already under attack. His solar bark cuts through a horizon turned the color of copper and old blood. Around him stand the gods of his retinue, silent, alert, weapons in hand. The air is heavy. The light is dying. And in ancient Egypt, that was never just a sunset. It was an assault. Each evening, Egyptians believed the sun did not simply disappear. It descended into the Duat, the underworld, where enemies waited in the dark waters beyond the world of the living. There, hidden in the blackness beyond human sight, something lunged for the boat of the Creator himself. Something ancient. Something hungry. The death of daylight was not a routine. It was a crime repeated across eternity. Imagine the terror of that thought. Every single night, the God who made the world could fail to return. Every dawn was not guaranteed, it was a victory. 1. Defended. Pulled back from catastrophe. And as the light collapses and the western gate opens, the question begins to sharpen like a blade: who, exactly, is trying to kill the sun? Was it the force Egyptians most feared in the darkness below? Or was the real story buried under centuries of accusation, propaganda, and divine betrayal? Because one name always surfaces when chaos rises: Set. And yet, the evidence is stranger than the legend. To us, sunset is a law of nature. To ancient Egypt, it was a disappearance that demanded explanation. The sun was not an object. It was a king. A witness. A living power whose gaze touched every temple wall, every field of barley, every face turned upward in prayer. Ra crossed the sky by day in splendor, but by night, he entered a realm of danger where no mortal could follow. This belief transformed the cosmos into a battlefield. Beneath the earth lay the Duat, a labyrinth of caverns, gates, lakes of fire, knife-wielding guardians, and regions of total darkness. Through that nightmare country Ra sailed each night, old and vulnerable in one form, renewing himself in another. The journey was mapped in funerary texts painted on tomb walls: the Amjuat, the Book of Gates, the Book of Caverns. These were not fantasies to the Egyptians. They were field reports from the edge of annihilation. And that changes everything. If Ra vanished each evening, then someone or something was intercepting him. The disappearance of the sun became the oldest cold case in human imagination, a cosmic pattern, a recurring attack, an attempted regicide against the divine ruler of creation. So the investigators of myth asked the same question we ask now: who profits when the sun is swallowed? Who rules the places beyond the fertile Nile, beyond order, beyond law? Who thrives where storm, fear, and confusion reign? The obvious suspect was already waiting in the desert wind. Set had the profile of a perfect villain. He was the god of storms that shredded the sky, of deserts that swallowed caravans, of foreign lands beyond Egypt's borders, of violence, uproar, and things that refused to stay in their proper place. In art, he appears with that strange and unsettling animal head, the so-called Set beast, part aardvark, part jackal, part nightmare, impossible to pin down. Even his face looks like a distortion. A warning. And then there was his record. This was the god who, in the most infamous act of Egyptian myth, murdered his own brother Osiris. He hacked apart a king. He usurped a throne. He battled Horus in a feud soaked in blood, humiliation, and legal intrigue. If Egypt kept a list of dangerous gods, Set's name would be carved near the top. So of course later memory treated him as the enemy of divine order itself, as if chaos had a single face and it was his. A prosecutor would have loved this case. Means? Absolutely. Motive? Easy to imagine. Reputation? Damning. But mythology is rarely that simple. Gods are not moral categories. They are forces. Contradictions. Set brought terror, yes, but he also embodied strength fierce enough to stand where gentler gods could not. In some eras he was honored as a royal protector. In others, feared as a breaker of worlds. And here is the first crack in the accusation: when Ra enters the underworld, some texts do not place Set among his assassins. They place him on the sun god's boat, armed for war. Now the mystery becomes dangerous. Because Ra is no ordinary victim. He is the divine king, the aging sun, the first ruler, the eye that sees all things beneath heaven. Every day he crowns the world in light. Every night he becomes the target of a recurring underworld assault so severe that the survival of creation hangs in the balance. If Ra falls, dawn does not come. Crops fail. Time stalls. The dead are trapped. The cosmos itself begins to rot. And yet beside him, in some of the most striking Egyptian accounts, stands Set, not as executioner, but as bodyguard. Set with the spear. Set braced at the prow. Set facing the true horror that rises from the depths, the serpent Apophis, called Apep, the great enemy of light, the devourer who tries to halt the solar bark and drag existence back into primeval night. So what happened to Set's reputation? How did a god shown defending Ra become remembered as the force aligned with darkness? Was he always double-faced, protector in one age, monster in another? Did politics among priests reshape the myth? Did the murder of Osiris stain every deed that followed? Or are we looking at one of mythology's oldest miscarriages of justice? Because if Set is not the hand reaching for Ra at sunset, then the case is far bigger than a feud between gods. It is a war over who controls the story of order itself. And in the next chapter, we follow Ra into the Duat, where the real attacker finally begins to move beneath the black water. Night fell over the Nile like a burial shroud. Torches trembled in the wind. And in the royal house of Egypt's gods, a feast became a crime scene. This was Set's most infamous accusation, the murder of Osiris. According to the ancient tradition, Set arrived not as a raging beast, but as a smiling brother with a perfect trap, a magnificent chest, carved to Osiris's exact measurements, offered as a gift to whoever could fit inside. One by one, the guests tried. One by one, they failed. Then Osiris lay down. And the lid slammed shut. The seals were fastened. The chest was dragged into darkness. And the king of the dead was cast into the Nile. But the story grows colder still. In later versions, Set did not merely kill Osiris, he tore the body apart, scattering the pieces across Egypt, turning the whole kingdom into a map of mourning. Was this the act of a god-born evil? Or the symbolic destruction of royal order itself? Because in Egyptian myth, Osiris was more than a brother. He was kingship, fertility, green life rising from the black soil. To strike him down was to strike the throne. And so, from this moment onward, Set's name begins to drip with suspicion. Then came the witnesses. Isis, widow, sorceress, and relentless hunter of the truth, moved through the marshes like a queen wrapped in grief and iron. In myth, she gathered the broken body of Osiris, spoke the words of restoration, and conceived Horus, the child who would grow into Set's accuser. Imagine that image, a hidden mother in the papyrus reads, guarding a divine heir while the murderer still sat close to power. And when Horus came of age, the case did not end in silence. It became a trial before the gods. In the contendings of Horus and Set, the divine courtroom is anything but calm. Ra presides. The Ennead debates. Horus claims the throne as Osiris's rightful son. Set argues that strength, not inheritance, should rule Egypt. There are insults. Shifting alliances. Strange contests. Even moments of brutal humiliation and magical deception. This is not a simple tale of light versus darkness. It is a political trial dressed in sacred language. So whose testimony should we trust? Isis, whose love made her unstoppable. Horus, whose crown depended on victory. Or the court itself, a gathering of gods who may have been judging not only a murder, but the future shape of Egyptian kingship? Yet the file on Set refuses to close so neatly. Beyond the green ribbon of the Nile lay the red land, the desert, the storm, the foreign horizon where caravans vanished and armies appeared like mirages turning into steel. That was Set's territory. He was the god of harsh winds, chaos at the border, violence in open country. To farmers, that made him terrifying. To a kingdom surrounded by danger, it also made him necessary. Because Egypt did not only need gods who made grain grow. It needed a force that could stand at the edge of civilization and strike first. In older traditions, Set was no minor demon hiding from the sun. He was a warrior of immense power, so fierce that he could stand in the solar bark itself and defend Ra against Apophis, the serpent of annihilation. Pause on that image. The supposed villain of darkness, spear raised, fighting beside the sun god against a deeper darkness still. So why, then, was this protector remembered mainly as Osiris's killer? Perhaps because gods, like kings, do not control their own reputations. Priests do. Dynasties do. Victors do. And once Horus became the perfect image of legitimate pharaohship, Set's desert strength could be recast as a threat to order itself. Now the investigation turns from myth to power. Set was not hated equally in every age. In some periods, he was honored openly, especially in places tied to the eastern delta and desert frontiers, where his ferocity looked less like evil and more like protection. Some rulers even bore names invoking Set. That matters. Because if a god were truly nothing but a demon of darkness, why would kings place themselves under his banner? Then history shifted. As political centers changed, as rival priesthoods rose, as memories of foreign rule scarred Egypt's imagination, Set's image darkened. The god of the border became easier to associate with outsiders, disorder, and the trauma of invasion. Royal ideology had a use for that transformation. Horus could shine brighter if Set stood deeper in shadow. Osiris could embody sacred continuity if Set carried the stain of rupture and revolt. And that leaves us with a disturbing possibility. What if the final villain of this story was partly manufactured by centuries of sacred propaganda? But one clue refuses to fit the official verdict. If Set was truly the enemy of Ra, the devourer of light, then why do ancient scenes still show him aboard the sun god's own ship? Defending creation at the hour before dawn? To answer that, we have to follow Ra into the night, to the moment when the real enemy rises from the abyss. The investigation descends below the desert. Not into legend alone, but into stone. Into painted corridors where the dead were armed with maps, passwords, warnings, and names. If we want to know who truly hunted Ra in the night, we do not begin on the battlefield. We begin in the tomb. The Book of the Dead, the Amjuat, the Book of Gates, the Book of Caverns, these were not decorative fantasies. They were evidence logs from the Egyptian imagination. Case files from priests, scribes, and funerary specialists who believed the underworld could be documented, stage by stage, hour by hour. On tomb walls in the Valley of the Kings, Ra's solar bark moves through 12 regions of night. Around him are guardians with knives, lakes of fire, serpents coiled in caverns, gods standing watch like silent witnesses in a cosmic tribunal. And the deeper we look, the stranger the pattern becomes. Set is present, yes, sometimes powerful, sometimes necessary, even standing on the prow of the sun god's boat with spear in hand. That detail matters. Because it means the enemy may not be Set at all. The images do not show Ra fleeing from Set. They show Ra besieged by something older. More primal. Again and again, the texts mark moments of ambush. A swallowing. A binding. A monstrous body stretched across the waters of the Duat. The scribes leave clues everywhere, as if whispering across 3,000 years, look closer. The darkness has a name. Then the name emerges from the record, Apep. Apophis. The great serpent of unmaking. Not a rival king. Not a jealous heir. A force of interruption itself. In the funerary books, he waits in the blind places of the Duat, hidden in reed-dark waters, coiled behind gates, stretched across entire caverns like a living eclipse. His purpose is terrifyingly simple: stop the sun. Swallow the bark. Break the cycle. End tomorrow. This is why the ancient scenes feel less like myth and more like testimony. Every night, Ra enters the underworld old and vulnerable, his radiance reduced, his power tested. And there, always there, waits Apophis. Sometimes he attacks with coils. Sometimes with hypnosis, freezing the crew in dread. Sometimes the texts describe him drinking the river itself, trying to strand the solar bark in dead water. In other scenes he is cut, burned, pinned with knives, only to return again the next night. He cannot be killed in any final sense. Chaos does not die. It must be defeated repeatedly. And Set? Here the story twists. In several underworld texts, it is Set, the storm god, fierce and violent, who stands at the prow and strikes Apophis with a spear. The very god later remembered as murderer and usurper becomes, in these nocturnal hours, Ra's bodyguard. That is not a minor contradiction. It is a revelation. So if Set is sometimes the defender, then who has been stalking Ra through the darkness all along? To understand why Apophis matters, we have to abandon a modern assumption. In Egyptian myth, darkness is not simply the absence of daylight. Night itself is necessary. Night is part of the cycle. Ra must descend, travel, renew, and rise. Without night, there is no rebirth. The true threat is not darkness as a time of day. It is chaos, formlessness, rebellion, the collapse of pattern. That is what Apophis embodies. And standing against that collapse is one of the most powerful ideas in Egyptian religion, Ma'at. Truth. Balance. Right measure. Cosmic order. Ma'at is not merely a goddess with an ostrich feather upon her head. She is the legal standard of the universe. The principle by which kings rule, the Nile floods in season, the stars move without collision, and the dead are judged. Even gods are measured against her. Even gods can fail her. Now the case sharpens. When Ra fights through the underworld, he is not just trying to survive an attack. He is defending Ma'at itself, the arrangement of reality. If Apophis wins, the danger is not one more lost battle. It is the end of law, of sunrise, of time. The Egyptians feared that deeply because they saw order as fragile, precious, hard-won. That is why the serpent appears as a criminal force in the texts, cursed, bound, hacked apart in formal language that sounds almost judicial. The night voyage is a trial. The verdict must be renewed before dawn. And all of Egypt, living and dead, has a stake in the outcome. But Ra did not fight alone. In temple sanctuaries and ritual chambers, the priests of Egypt believed they were active participants in the sun god's survival. While the bark traveled through the Duat, men in linen stood before statues, recited protective formulae, burned incense, drew circles of defense, and performed acts of symbolic violence against the serpent. Wax figures of Apophis were spat upon, trampled, stabbed, bound, and thrown into fire. Names were written to be erased. Bodies were fashioned only to be destroyed. This was liturgy as warfare. To us, it may look theatrical. To them, it was urgent statecraft on a cosmic scale. If the rituals failed, if words were neglected, if order was not maintained, then the enemy gained ground. The temple was not separate from the myth. It was one of the places where the myth happened. Every chant was a weapon. Every gesture, a reinforcement of Ma'at. Every dawn, a verdict in Ra's favor. And yet, the very need for these rituals reveals something unsettling. If Apophis was only a monster in a story, why did generations of priests treat him like an active threat? Why preserve entire sequences for binding, mutilating, and annihilating a being who supposedly never truly entered the world of men? Because the Egyptians believed he did. In storms. In eclipses. In political disorder. In every breach of sacred balance. And in the next chapter, the evidence becomes even more dangerous, for the text suggests that chaos did not remain in the underworld. It found allies above the earth. In the deepest hour of night, when the solar bark drifts through the black waters of the Duat, Ra is not alone. Torchlight shivers across painted cedar. The air is thick with funerary incense and river mist. And there, standing at the prow, braced against the coming dark, is a figure the story should have taught us to fear. Set. Red-haired, sharp-faced, violent as a desert storm, gripping a spear as the coils of Apophis rise from the abyss. It is a shocking image, almost a reversal of the myth itself. Was Set not the god of disorder? The murderer of Osiris? The name later Egyptian tradition would speak with suspicion, even hatred. And yet in multiple temple scenes and funerary traditions, Set is not Ra's executioner at all, he is Ra's defender. The god of the harsh horizon becomes the blade at the sun god's side. Why? Because the night voyage is not a gentle passage. It is an ambush repeated every evening. Beneath the boat, Apophis, the colossal serpent of uncreation, waits to swallow dawn before dawn can be born. Against such a monster, polite divinity is useless. Ra does not need softness at the prow. He needs force. He needs a god who knows how to strike without hesitation. He needs Set. And if that is true, then perhaps the old division between light and darkness has already begun to crack. Then the serpent surges. Apophis does not merely attack, he unravels. He rears from the underworld waters like a living eclipse, scales gleaming black-green in the bark's firelight, jaws wide enough to swallow the sun disk itself. The waters convulse. The crew of gods strain at ropes and ritual power. Spells are spoken. Sacred names are hurled into the dark. But at the front of the boat, one weapon answers the monster in its own language. Set drives his spear downward. That detail matters. In these traditions, Set is not redeemed by becoming gentle. He is useful because he remains dangerous. Egyptian myth understood something profoundly unsettling, that chaos cannot always be answered by innocence. Sometimes cosmic order survives only because one fierce, unstable power is harnessed against another. Set becomes controlled violence in service of Ma'at, the balance of the world. Not harmless. Not pure. But necessary. This is why the contradiction survives. Egyptian mythology often preserves competing truths side by side, like two sacred images painted on the same wall. Set is the slayer of Osiris, and Set is the shield of Ra. He is desert chaos, and he is the one standing between creation and annihilation. The tradition does not rush to tidy the paradox away. It lets the contradiction remain, because the gods themselves are larger than moral simplicity. So what if Set was never only the enemy? What if he was also the weapon heaven could not afford to discard? But history is not kind to complicated gods. As centuries passed, Set's image darkened. His association with foreign lands, desert violence, and political enemies hardened into something closer to outright demonization, especially in later periods, when devotion to Osiris made Set's crime impossible to forgive. Temples were altered. Names were attacked. The old storm god, once terrifying but indispensable, was increasingly recast as the face of disorder itself. And in that later shadow, his place at Ra's prow became easier to forget. Yet those older images remain like testimony carved in stone. Set standing armed in the night. Set spearing Apophis. Set, not as a comfortable hero, but as a brutal guardian whose violence is turned outward, away from the sun, away from creation, toward the serpent that would end all things. This does not erase his guilt. It makes him more disturbing than a simple villain, because it suggests that Egyptian myth saw darkness inside the defense of light itself. And that changes the entire case. If Set can be both traitor and protector, if the god accused of embodying chaos is also the one holding chaos back, then the final showdown between Ra and Set cannot be understood as a clean war between good and evil. Something older is happening. Something more dangerous. Because there is one last question the priests, the hymns, and the temple walls leave hanging in the dark. When the serpent rises for the last time, will Set still aim his spear at Apophis? Or will he turn it toward Ra? The night is almost spent. Around the solar bark, the last waters of the Duat churn like black oil beneath a dying sky. The gods are wounded. The oars tremble in exhausted hands. And there, coiled across the passage of dawn itself, lies Apophis, the great serpent of unmaking, vast enough to seem less like a creature than a tear in creation. His scales drink what little light remains. His jaws open. And for a breathless moment, it seems the sun will not rise. Then Ra stands. Not as a distant golden disk, not as a symbol carved in temple stone, but as the aging sovereign of the cosmos, battered, eternal, and still burning. Beside him is Set, red of desert, lord of storm and violence, his spear lifted against the ancient enemy. The final clash is not graceful. It is brutal. Sacred. Necessary. Set drives forward at the prow, shouting into the darkness, striking at the serpent's skull while the crew of the bark bind, hack, and invoke the words of power that hold the universe together. This is not a war fought once. It is fought every night. And then, the turn. Apophis recoils. The coils loosen. The eastern horizon, thin as a blade, begins to glow. Gold spills across the waters. The sky blushes red. Ra emerges victorious, rising again into the world of the living. Farmers wake. Priests open temple doors. Children feel warmth on their faces. Dawn comes, not as a guarantee, but as a hard-won verdict. Light has survived one more night. And here, at the very edge of sunrise, Egyptian myth delivers its most unsettling revelation. The story was never as simple as Ra against Set. Light against darkness. Good against evil. That is too clean for the ancient world. Too easy. Too modern. The true abyss has another name, Apophis, Apep, the devourer, the enemy not of one god but of existence itself. He is not rebellion. He is annihilation. Not conflict, but collapse. Not the storm in the desert, the silence after the world has been swallowed whole. Set is something far more complicated. He is chaos, yes, but bounded chaos. Violence with a face. Fury that can be aimed like a weapon. He murders Osiris in one tradition, usurps power, terrifies gods and men alike. And yet here, on the solar bark, he is also defender. The same force that threatens order in one myth becomes its shield in another. Why? Because the Egyptians understood something many cultures tried to deny: order cannot survive by purity alone. Sometimes it must place a blade in the hands of what it fears. So Set is not erased. He is recruited. The desert god, the breaker of peace, the red one of thunder and foreign lands, becomes the spear arm of the sun god against the deeper horror. What could be more disturbing, or more brilliant? Chaos is not defeated. Chaos is harnessed. In the Egyptian imagination, even the monstrous may be given a place. If it stands between the world and the void. This is the deeper judgment hidden inside the myth. Egyptian religion was not built on the fantasy that evil could be erased forever. It was built on maintenance, on vigilance, ritual, kingship, and balance. The word was Ma'at, order, truth, rightness, the harmony that kept the Nile flowing, the dead judged, the heavens turning. But Ma'at did not exist in a vacuum. It lived under threat. Constantly. Every sunrise proved it. That is why the pharaoh mattered so much. He was not merely a ruler in a crown of gold and lapis. He was the human guarantor of cosmic stability, the earthly partner of Ra, the one who must hold back famine, rebellion, invasion, and divine disorder. And that also explains Set's strange place in Egyptian thought. Power itself was dangerous, too dangerous to leave wild, too necessary to discard. The king needed ferocity. The state needed force. The gods themselves, at times, needed Set. What does that say about fear? It says the Egyptians did not imagine courage as innocence. They imagined it as endurance. As the ability to look into the serpent's mouth and keep rowing. To speak the spell again. To raise the spear again. To welcome dawn not as entitlement, but as survival. That is why this conflict endures. Because every civilization wrestles with the same terrible question: what do you do with powers that can save the world? And also wound it? Banish them? Worship them? Or bind them to the service of order, knowing the risk never disappears? So when the sun rises over Egypt, over obelisks, river reeds, silent tombs, and stone faces worn by 4,000 years of wind, we are left with a final, unnerving truth. The battle between Ra and Set was never merely a duel between hero and villain. It was a case study in survival. A warning. A confession. The Egyptians knew that the forces most capable of defending civilization were often the very forces that could fracture it. That is the myth's last twist. And perhaps its most human one. Set remains dangerous. He is still the storm at the border, the cry of usurpation, the violence that can tear a kingdom apart. But against Apophis, against oblivion itself, he becomes indispensable. And that is why this story refuses to die. Because it speaks to every age that has feared collapse. Every throne that relied on force. Every people who discovered that order is not a permanent state, but a victory renewed at dawn. The sun rises. The serpent retreats. The verdict is delivered, for now. But in mythology, as in history, the case is never truly closed. If you want to uncover more ancient case files, the gods, the monsters, the betrayals, the mysteries buried beneath temple sand and broken stone, subscribe to the Myth Archive. Step deeper into the evidence. Return to the oldest stories on Earth. And join us for the next investigation.